Welcome to Victory Echoes, the CAC podcast. We are growing Apostolic legacy, and today I have my bishop, Bishop Sjostrand. Thank you so much for being here today. So I have just a quick question to start out, and I didn't give him too much preparation for this, but um, just one right off the top. What is your favorite Bible character and why?
Well, thank you, Hannah, for the invitation. Good to be here. Uh, I have more than two, but my Old Testament favorite character is Joseph, and I think that I always look at his life and the things that he went through. And when he came to the end, he said, "You all meant all this harm for evil, but God meant it for good. I'm here to save my brothers and my family and a nation." And so, but what he went through always kind of, I think that he just was so human and
Yeah,
so like us.
right.
And then my New Testament favorite character is Paul the Apostle,
That's a good
because
one.
first of all, he wrote 14 books, good part of the New Testament,
Mm-hmm.
and he writes some things like, well, more human, like uh, when I want to do good, I do bad, and I have trouble here, and so it just kind of I relate to all
Yeah.
of his problems
Yeah.
that he had. So
Yeah.
those are two of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
Of course, the Lord and
Well,
others, but I mean, the one that really relates down to earth is
yeah.
Paul in the New Testament.
Yeah. It's hard to relate to Joseph, but it's powerful that after all that he went through, he forgave his brothers.
Brothers.
Yeah, we actually just taught that Joseph in Sunday school this morning to our
Oh
first through
well.
third graders. So that's funny. Um, okay, so my next question is I just want kind of like for those who kind of are new here or who may be here and don't know your story, kind of give me like a timeline of your story.
Well, I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it was in 1933. So, in fact, in August. But I went to church. My sisters and I rode a Sunday school bus. In fact, the bus was yellow. We called it the banana boat, but uh, it would pick us up for Sunday school. They had a Sunday school ministry, and we would go as the children. And my mother, of course, there were six of us in the family, so she's pretty busy. And but she always gave us a nickel or a dime, and we had a Bible to carry. We always had the Bible and an offering to go, and we'd ride to Sunday school. Well, there were some times that my sister and I would pray when it was cold, 10 below zero or so. We'd pray, "Oh Lord, I hope the bus doesn't start." But it would always be there and pick us up, and we'd go. And and then I received the Holy Ghost as a teenager, and in fact, junior high, just getting ready to start high school, and uh, I was uh, 13, I guess, 13 and a half, when Joseph Hershen was holding a revival in our church. Some students from ABI, from the school, came and said, "We'd like for you to come to revival." And so uh, my mother said yes. Naturally, we could go, and with them, they'd come by and pick us up. So my cousin and I, Earl Smith, lived a couple blocks, so he went with us. He was a little older than me. and we went. And so when the altar call was given, um, they said, that are unsaved and you sinners, come and repent. And I told my cousin, we were sitting together, and I said, Earl, that's for us. We need to go. And he said, oh, no, we're kids. We don't need to go. He said, that's for the older people. And he kept on saying, come and repent. And so I said, I got to go. So I went in, of course. Who should follow me but my cousin Earl?
There you go.
And then we were baptized that night. And then a few months later, the Lord filled us with the Holy Ghost. That began my walk with the Lord. And then through high school, I had no intention of being in the ministry or doing any of that. In fact, I kind of wanted to be an architect, and so I was headed in that direction with my studies. And then Brother Norris, the pastor, said that when you graduate from high school, you need to have a couple years of Bible school anyway. Whatever you do from there, college or whatever you want to do, you go. Well, I went to ABI, and my fourth year, my brother-in-law said, uh, when you graduate, come to St. Louis and help us in church. You're schooled and ready. And so we got married my last year of school in '56, and my wife and I went my brother-in-law's church to help him. We really at first didn't have a title like assistant pastor, or we were helpers. We just worked in Sunday school, youth, wherever we could do, fill in when he was gone, and help the young people. Whatever we could do, we just filled in, and eventually became assistant pastor. And then superintendent of Missouri said, like for you to go down to the southern part of Missouri for a few months and help a church until they could pastor. Well, of course, I was a insurance agent. My wife worked in a office as a secretary. Well, we quit our jobs, and my son was born, and we took a little church in actually what we call a village. It was 492 population,
Oh my.
but they had uh, about 40 people maybe in a little village church. And so we said, well, we'll help them uh, until they can get a pastor, which we did. But the Lord gave us several miracles while we were there. And when they finally got a pastor after probably 8 or 10 months or so, we moved back to St. Louis. And my brother-in-law had a family move south about 30 miles from St. Louis in Crystal City and Festus, Missouri. And one family, they had 3 children, and my wife and I and my son, we started home missionary work. And so was in a storefront and an old building, and we had church. And uh, we were there probably a little over a year when the superintendent of Illinois called me and said, I'd like for you to come to Illinois, just north of St. Louis, about 60 miles. He said, you won't be too far from your brother-in-law, and this church needs you. So another individual took over the work, that home mission work, and we moved to Greenfield, Illinois. And Greenfield was kind of a stepping stone for us in the sense that my wife got a job in a factory there, and I went to work for Sears and became a buyer and advertising manager. And my wife said, "I can't work in this factory. It's just It's killing me.
Oh my gosh.
She
Yeah.
said she was sewing, and she loved to sew, but she said it's piecework, and said I can't do it. And she said I'm going to university. So she started in Southern Illinois University, and as an English major, and ended up an art major. And so I had a good position in. In fact, I was third highest in the store. We had the Lord just lifted me up from one position to another, and we had the president and vice president, and the advertising manager and buyer was me, and so I was third highest in the store. My wife had, after about 4 years, 4.5 years, she graduated from the university, and we had some county high schools that they were building that the smaller communities had primary schools and elementary schools, and but this was a high school, and it was a big, and they had just marvelous. And so my wife signed a contract to teach at this new high school that was just a few miles from us. It was in our county, and so we were probably we were pastoring a church. I had a good position. My wife had a good position to teach art in high school, in a new high school, brand new, and got a call from the superintendent in Arkansas and said, "I'd like for you to come." And I told my wife, we can't go." I said,
Yeah.
and he said, "You need to come by and preach there." I said, "Well, we are going to Louisiana." I said, "We'll be coming through Arkansas, and we'll stop by and preach." Well, I did. It was a little church, and in a little community called Lone Oak, which was about 20 miles from Little Rock, and nice little church, and but they needed a pastor, and so a friend of mine, in fact, the best man in my wedding was in Little Rock, and he said, "Oh, you got to come." He said, "You're just a few miles from me, and and I said, we have too much to give up. I said,
Yeah.
my job, I have a church, my
Yeah.
wife has signed a contract, and so I went back and I said, well, they'll never call us. They tried out several more preachers, and so I said, they won't call it. Well, in about a month, I got a call, and they said, we'd had an election, and you were elected pastor. And I said, I was what? And he was the chairman of the board, church board. He said, aren't you happy? I said, oh, well, yes, I guess. Anyway, I told my wife, I said, well, we're not going to go. I'll go down and meet with him and tell him. And, she said, well, let's pray about it. So I know it's a step backward, but I fleeced the Lord. We had just bought a 2-story home, and I had remodeled the kitchen and the bathroom, and it was just about 2 blocks from church, and I said, you've signed a contract, and I said, they won't release you for a year. If you break the contract, you won't be able to teach. And I said, I have such a good position. And I said, as far as income, I said, we're just doing great.
Yeah.
And I said, but I'm going to ask, and I know it's, as I said, a step backwards, but I said, I'm going to fleece the Lord. I'm going to say, Lord, I'm going to ask twice as much money for my house, and you can see if you can get released from your contract. And I knew they wouldn't do it. And I knew I couldn't sell my house for twice as much as I paid for it. And I said my job would release me, that I could work at Sears in Little Rock. And so I said, go talk to the principal and see if you can get released. She got released. And I said, oh. I said, well, the house will never sell. And I went down to, we had a weekly paper in the city. I went down and I told him, I said, put this at the end of the week, put my house listed for sale. And so I said, I knew I wouldn't get a buyer. Before it got in the paper, an individual came by who was the manager of one of the nursing homes there in the city, came by and said, I'd like to buy your house. And I told her the price. She said, well, that's fine. I said, it is? Yeah. She said, whatever you're asking for it, I'll give you.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, that's 2 strikes.
Yep.
So I went to my boss, president of the Sears, and I told him that I was thinking about moving to near Little Rock. And he said, well, that'd be fine. I'll release you and I'll call them and you can get a job there if you want.
Wow.
I went back and told my wife, I said, well, I guess we're going to Arkansas.
Wow.
I said, the Lord honored every request that we had. And I said, so I think that's a sign I need to go. And the church was blessed, and they got a pastor, and we moved to Arkansas. And so there, my wife started teaching 2nd grade, and then they asked her, put art in the program, and she started teaching art in high school and junior high, and so we knew that the Lord was blessing us, or we were in His will.
Yeah.
And we ended up being in Arkansas 52 years.
Wow.
And then in 2019, my son moved us to Ohio, and so here we are.
Yes.
So that's kind of a timeline of our life.
I love that. There is a lot. I mean, there's just so much to that. I love that he just showed himself strong in where you were like, oh, none of these will happen. And only God could make that happen for you. And he did exactly that. And it was in His will. That's powerful. So through that, I mean, you kind of just were kind of thrown into it. And you said you kind of didn't want to start out you didn't start out wanting to be a pastor, but then you just kind of were a helper. And then you kind of were, you kind of moved up to assistant and then pastor, and kind of that. And any time in that, were you like, okay, yeah, pastor's what I'm meant to do?
Well, I guess a couple things. When I was in ABI, was in the Bible school, I worked for Montgomery Ward. In fact, a lot of these students, we worked because they were open till 9. We could work part-time, go to school. We went to school till 1 o'clock, and we could work afternoon and evening.
Okay.
And so I worked, and I was a shoe salesman. It was a family shoe department, and men, women, and children, and so I guess I had a love for people. I just enjoyed helping people, just whatever the situation was, and I think that's what led me into becoming a pastor, was my love for people, and then I had a love for the Word. When we were kids in Sunday school in Midway Tabernacle in St. Paul, Brother Norris, the pastor, came and got several of us boys together. We were 13, 14, just teenagers. And he said, how many of you had comic books? Well, we all raised our hand. There was 6 or 8 of us. We said, yes, we love them. And we did. We had stacks. We'd trade them.
Yep.
You read this one and read this one. And that was just fun. Of course, now I'm talking about before TV and all of these things.
That was your fun.
Yeah. And so we just enjoyed that. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, boys, let's this week, let's read Genesis, the first chapter. And he said, I'm going to get you back and ask you some questions. What do you think about it? But we all read it. And, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth and creation and so on. And he'd ask us some questions. And I realized later on what he was doing was getting us a love. We had a love for comic books. He was wanting to give us a love for the Word.
Yeah.
And so we didn't realize. We just thought he was just helping us, and he was.
Yeah.
And but it created a love. Then he'd tell us, well, let's read Matthew, first chapter, and he just went around. But then all of a sudden, comic books were second place, and we enjoyed reading because he was going to ask us some questions. But he was developing a love for, with us for the Word. Yeah. And I think that's why I became a pastor. Was I love to help people and love the Word to teach them. And when they were hungry, well, let me tell you about this, and let me explain this to you. And so a love for people and a love for the Word, I guess, is why I ended up in the ministry. Yeah, because that's what's there is the Word and people.
Yep, dealing with people and loving and teaching the Word. That's good. So were there any challenges that you face, like with dealing with people and dealing with, going through that time of like the transition or anything like that, challenges that you face that you feel like made you grow?
I think that probably the biggest challenge that we had, of course, I had a family, I had a son, was to balance the job, your work, the church, your family, education, to try to balance all of that and to put that in what's priority. Well, number one was God. Number two was my family. Number three was church. 4, education. 5, your work. But I had to put those in line. God first, then my family, then the church, the people of God. And when you get that out of balance, that's one of the biggest challenges because it's easy to get that out of balance.
Yeah.
And I know when I was in Arkansas and became a presbyter, I had individuals come up to me and say, Sjostrand, how did you do this? I lost my son. I lost my daughter. But I was dedicated to church. I worked 24/7s, 7/24s, just all the time. And they got it out of balance. And I would talk to them and tell them, well, you've got to get it back in balance. I said, and that's very difficult to do. Yeah. When you're trying to do that and do the work of God and keep that. So that's probably the biggest challenge that we had. But once you got that in order, then things would flow pretty good.
Yeah. Is there any circumstance or anything that you can think of where like talking about that balance. I mean, obviously you want to keep God as the top, but do you feel like some other things with whatever season of life you're in, you feel like you could switch any of those, or do you feel like you should have a set, here is my priority list, and it doesn't change? Do you feel like that can ever waver? I mean, other than God, but
Well, the Lord naturally first. You have to put God first,
yeah.
and then you have to balance your family. I think is second. Your wife, your children. I think second, and then you kind of have to. You might juggle the job some and education and the schooling and so on. I think that those things you can juggle a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
one might be first and
Right.
second, but as
Yeah.
long as you keep God the focus,
Yeah.
the Lord,
Right.
and then I think these others will work out.
Yeah. I think it's powerful too, because you can keep God as the top, but then keep God as the top in your job, keep God as the top in your school. Even if you're in those places, you can bring God to each and every one of those. And, even if you're at work, maybe you bring them, your family, and you make sure that well, I'm here at work, but then, I talk to you, but I talk to you different than I talk to my family. And, keeping your top two as your priority, I think that's a powerful lesson, because it's very hard to keep, when life is just a hurricane, to keep that just center. God is the center. God is the top of my priority, and then family. I think that's really a very good lesson to keep, and I think that's kept you for
Right, it
all
did
the
keep me.
years. Yeah.
And a story I can tell you about when I was buyer and manager at Sears. I was I was a buyer for boys and young men's clothing, and I was down in the department. There were salesmen that were there, and I was standing in a counter. We had large windows all around the store that had displays and mannequins and things in them. You know how the storefronts are,
Mm-hmm.
and I was standing about 6 feet from the window, and there was a lady was in a car, and she was backing in right by the store, in front of the store, and she hit the accelerator and jumped the curb, and the car went right into the store where I was standing.
Right where you were
Right
standing.
where I was standing.
Oh my gosh.
And it had got hung up on the counters, and so the wheels were just spinning.
Oh.
And I was standing with my back to the window, and when that happened, it was just like an explosion. And of course, the store was downtown, and we were just blocks from police department and all fire department and all that.
Yeah.
And then almost immediately they were there with the ambulances, and some were hurt. Glass was all over, and the Lord sent an angel and moved me from that place across the store to another department, and the president came down, and they said, "Mr. Sjostrand's underneath the car," because there were mannequins that were cut up and
Yeah.
broken,
And you were there. I mean, they just
and
figured
I
you were
was
there.
standing there. See,
Yeah.
and the Lord moved me,
Wow.
and they found me across another department, and the paramedics and that came, and the president came down, and he said, "Well, they said you were under the car," and I said, "Well, I was standing where the car is now." And the glass, of course, cut up the mannequins and just
Yeah.
and they took some to the hospital, and paramedic came up and said, "Are you okay?" And the president said, "Well, he's in shock." And he said, "What happened?" I said, "Well, only thing I know is the Lord moved me from one place to
Wow.
another." And he said, "Well, are you hurt?" And the paramedics started checking me over, and they found a little scratch on my hand where a piece of glass had hit. And he wiped that off and put a Band-Aid on and said, "I think you're okay." And the president of the store said, "Mr. Sjostrand, you have to come up to the office. You're in shock." And so I went up, and he said, "What happened?" And I said, "Well, the Lord just moved me." He said,
Yeah.
"You know, I believe that."
Wow.
He said, I believe the Lord moved you out of the way because the other salesman said you were standing
Yeah.
right next to the glass window, and so even on the job, God can
Oh,
perform a
yeah.
miracle,
Wow.
and you can be a testimony.
Yeah.
I was a testimony to the president of the store
Wow.
who believed that the Lord had done a miracle in my life.
Yeah. Wow. And if you had been in that department where you ended up the whole time, did that glass come that far? Did it come all the way into the where you
Oh,
were?
yes, it
Yeah.
was all over
Wow.
there. Yeah,
That's crazy.
it was, and of course, the windows were those big bay windows that were probably 12, 15 feet high and 10, 15 feet wide, one after another, were
Mm.
because they were window displays where people could see into the store.
Yeah.
So it was heavy,
That's crazy.
double strength glass, but it just when she backed into
Went
that,
into 'em.
it all came down.
Wow. That's crazy. That's awesome. That's so awesome. Um, yeah. So you went through all that. You've been through, I mean, just amazing, amazing things. God's done amazing things in your life. And now you're here with us, and we're so blessed. But what is now your role as bishop? And what all does that include?
Well, when I first became bishop, was in Arkansas, and uh, my role, believe it or not, didn't change a lot. Uh, my son was pastor for a while, then before he came here, and then his wife's brother became pastor, and my role as bishop was kind of overseer. I just took care of all the finances of the church, taught Sunday school class, young married Sunday school class, taught a Wednesday night Bible study. That was my job,
Mm-hmm.
and was in charge of all the buildings. We had a two-story educational building that was connected to our church, and just made sure everything was functioning proper, and so really just you filled in maintenance, and then when other churches would ask you to come to preach, you were, yes, I'm ready to come and help, and
Wow.
so it just a lot of things that you were involved in,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's kind of my as bishop, and here I just am ready to help in any
Yeah.
way that I can.
Yeah. I love that. That's awesome. So you started, you were a helper, and now you are continuing to be a helper anywhere we need you. That's
Right.
awesome.
Well, it's still it's the good word, helper.
Yes, yes. And you still have, I mean, you still have that. You're still working with people and you're still teaching the word and, learning and growing from the word. So you're holding on to that.
Okay, I'll tell you about being a pillar because I can tell a little miracle story of when we started out.
Okay. So what does it mean to be a pillar?
Are we on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What does it mean to be a pillar?
Yes.
I think probably the biggest factor in being a pillar, I learned because almost all of my pastoral life, I worked a job in the world.
Mm-hmm.
See, whether it was Sears or teaching school, I was involved in an outside job.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to be, there's one big word that I use. I had to be consistent.
Mm.
We would say in church, faithful.
Mm-hmm.
I had to show up for work every day, 8 o'clock, be ready to go, whatever my job was to do. And church, that falls, I had to be faithful, consistent, there to preach, teach, help, pray, whatever it was. You had to be, and it doesn't mean that you don't have high mountains and valleys. And in other words, sometimes there's ups and downs on the job or in the ministry, but you had to continually say, well, I'll be faithful. I'm going to walk with God. So I think that's the biggest factor in becoming a pillar is your steadfastness that through it all. And as I said, it doesn't mean that you don't have problems. You will have.
Yeah.
There are normal things in life. And I know when my wife and I were in St. Louis helping, just starting out. Well, of course, she's from Baton Rouge, which was 350 miles south of St. Louis. My home was 350 miles north, St. Paul, Minnesota. So in the summertime, we'd try to go north to see my folks. And of course, most of the year and in wintertime, we could go south because it was better traveling. And one year the first year I think we were there, we said, well, we got vacation time, few days off. We'll run see your folks in Baton Rouge. And we left St. Louis. Well, St. Louis, when you get not too far south, you get into the end of the Ozarks. It's hilly, not high mountains, but it's hilly because it's part of the Ozark Mountains, and there's just kind of rolling hills. And so we left early. My son was sleeping in the back seat. He was just little, and we put him in the back seat sleeping, and it was early in the morning, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And we were in the rolling hills, about probably 100 miles south of St. Louis. And it was early in the morning, and wasn't a lot of traffic on the highway, but we were coming up one of them rolling long hills, and all of a sudden I looked ahead of me was an 18-wheeler, semi, coming in my lane. It was passing a truck. And it took about 3 or 4 seconds. Believe this or not, an angel stepped in and took control of my car and drove me to the middle of the road.
I do believe that.
The truck went on my shoulder. The pickup that it was passing went on his shoulder. I had the whole road. I was in the middle. And I knew And when I got, it all was over in a few seconds, and I looked, and the semi rolled back on the road. The pickup got back on, and I could see because it was a rolling hill, and I could see, and they all
Wow.
got back. And I knew God, an angel had to, nobody could do that. And
No.
if I thought about it, well, my first thought would be if someone's in your lane, go to your shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
But if I would have went to my shoulder, I'd have
Yeah.
hit head on into an 18-wheeler. But I think 3 angels came and divided the water
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
And I knew, God, you got your hand on us.
Wow.
And so when you have a miracle like that takes place, and you know it's a miracle because you couldn't have, I wouldn't have done that just in
Right.
natural
That's not
thinking.
natural reaction.
And
Yeah.
so I know, God, you, I want to be a pillar. I want to be steadfast for you
Yeah.
because you're there controlling my life and giving us life,
Yeah.
our whole family.
Yeah. Wow.
So being a pillar, I think, is that consistent walk with God and just be faithful through the ups and the downs, and the
Yeah.
Lord will make a way for you.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that you being consistent, I mean, I know Pastor has preached from pulpit that growing up, I mean, it was, well, everyone else gets to do this, or, I wanted to, whatever. You stayed faithful, even on vacation, even in the places where, well, our people aren't here. Nobody sees me. Well, you kept God the center of wherever you were. No matter what you went through, no matter where you were, you stayed faithful to him, and you kept consistent boundaries for yourself everywhere. Everywhere that he brought you to and from, you stayed faithful to him. And I think that is very much a reason why, I mean, you're a pillar for this church, because your consistency has brought you, and you are very, very much a leader for everyone, younger people, everyone. So I'm very thankful. I thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
And,
Thank
and
you.
talking about your
Enjoyed it.
everything. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.